So in the previous video, we covered like variables and comments, and in this video, we are going to cover another two like very basic programming elements in Python and in many other programming languages, which are imports and while loops. So starting, yeah, and more or less these four things: comments, variables, imports, and loops. You know, these four basic things is what you are going to need to later on write the controller for today. So let's go with imports. So more or less, as I say here at the start, when you write some code, you want to reuse as much functionality written by others or by yourself as possible. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. And in Python, we use imports statements to access code or data written by other people. So once you open the Python command line, as I was showing before, you have access to like additions, subtractions, multiplications, divisions, and some other stuff. But neither Python nor many other programming languages are actually giving you access by default to more specialized functionality. So for example, eventually we are going to want to have access to Webot's robotic functionality within Python, and this is not coming by default, okay? So the way in Python we have access to load information that other people has done, load libraries, scripts, or models that other people has done, is using the import statement. And here what I've described is a basic functionality that you can check to test this. So Python by default does not have access to advanced mathematical functions, but we can use the import statement to access the math module. So this is just like the Python command line as before. So we start and the user, for example, writes log 10, which calculates the logarithmic value of 10. And here it says name error, log is not identified. So the operation log doesn't exist. By default, it's not part of Python. But then if we do very important import math, suddenly we are accessing like all the functionality from the math module. So we are bringing all this advanced math functionality into our current session, and then we can do something like math.log10, and then it calculates the correct value of the logarithmic of 10. So this is an example that you can see. By default, Python, once we start working with Python, like the command line doesn't have access to logarithmic operations, but if we import the math module, you can get access to it. And something that is also important is that you can do import math, and then you import like everything from the math module. So you have access to log, but you also have access to sinus, cosinus, tan operations, and many other things. Like, you have access to everything. But it might also be the case that you actually only want to access like a specific part of a library, because generally you want to import into your codes as little things as possible, because you want your code to be as light as possible. So for example, if you only want to work with the log functionality from the math library, you are going to write this from math import log, and in this case you have access to the log operation but nothing else. So here you can write like log 10, and it gives you like something like that. But if you did from math import log, and here you write sinus of 3, it's going to say like an M error, this is not recognized. On the other hand, if you have like import math, you can do math.log, you can do math.sin, and things like that. Something I also think is now a good moment to speak about is the period or the dot. So you can see here that, for example, we do like import math, and the way we have to accessing an element within this library is to put math.log parenthesis 10. This dot here is very, very important in Python and many other programming languages, and it is the way we have of accessing an element of a library or of any other data structure. So just remember math.log. If we had like another data structure that had many different things, we could do like data structure dot and one specific thing to get access to it. But yeah, the functionality behind the import statement is quite simple. from math import log or from robot import controller, for example, or things like that. So let's go to the last bit of programming that we are going to do today, which is the while loop, which is one of the most basic elements in any kind of programming language. And I think it's more or less what it says here. The while loop is used to iterate over and over again over a block of code as long as the test expression condition is true. So let's go here. So we enter the while loop, we test the expression. If the expression is true, we execute the statements and we test the expression again. If the expression is false, we exit the while loop. I hope very soon I'm going to show some examples, and I hope like you are going to get this clearer. But the thing is that so far our statements have been one line things or a few lines, something like x equals 5, x equals 6, y equals x plus x, things like this. But what happens, if you need to repeat the same operation over and over again? What happens, if you need to add 1 to x like 100 times in a row for some particular thing? So obviously you can, individually write like x equals x plus 1, x equals x plus 1 over and over again. But you can do this with a while loop. And the syntax in Python is actually very simple. So we write while, and then we write the expression to test, and then we write like the body of the while, like expressing like what's going to happen once text expression is true. And the body of the while can be like many lines of code. It can be just one, or it can be many of them. And something very important is that to indicate that this code happens while this expression is true, we need to tap. This is something like super important in Python. You will find many times and that there is like tabs, and it's a way that we have to show that some code belongs to something else. If there was not this tab and body of while was starting here at the same level, then it could not be executed as part of the while loop. Anyway, let's see some code, and I hope this is going to be clearer. So for example, here in this code, we start saying that n is equal 5, okay? In line 2, we do while n is bigger than 0. So we know now that n is 5. So n is bigger than 0. Yes, it is, because 5 is bigger than 0. So then we go inside the body of the while loop and we execute it. And what we do is n minus equal 1. So we are, subtracting 1 from n. This is the same as saying n equals n minus 1. So we are just removing one element from n. And then we are doing like print parenthesis n, which is like a function that Python has to print something, to print the value of something. So it will enter this loop. So n equals 5. Is n bigger than 0? Yes. Let's execute the code. So now here n is going to be 4, and we are going to print 4. So now at the moment that we finish this, we go back here again. Remember, statement true, we go back to the test expression. So we execute the statement, we go back to this expression. And now n is 4. Remember, is 4 bigger than 0? Yes, it is. So we go inside. Now n is going to be 3, and now we print 3. And we go again and again and again. Eventually, like n is going to be 1. So imagine that n is 2. So we enter the while loop. Now n is going to be 1. And now we print 1. Fine. And now we go here. And is 1 bigger than 0? Yes, it is. So we go here. So now n is going to be 0 because we remove 1. So now we print 0. And now, very careful, we go back here. And now remember, n is 0. Is 0 bigger than 0? No, it's not. 0 is equal 0. So n is not bigger than 0. Like this is false. So this means that the condition is false. So we exit the while loop. So we continue with our code here. Let's put another example, okay? So here we have n equals 10. And here we initialize a sum and a counter. So the sum is going to be 0, and the counter that we are going to be using is initialized to 1. So we say while I is smaller or equal than n, So remember that I is 1 and n is 10. So 1 is 1 smaller or equal than 10? Yes, it is. 1 is smaller than 10. So we enter, the body of the while loop, and we do sum equals sum plus 1. Remember here, sum is 0, I is 1. So this is 0 plus 1. So sum is going to be equal to 1. And then we are going to update the counter. So now I is equal to I plus 1. So now I is going to be 2. So now we go back to testing the expression. So now remember that I is 2. So is 2 smaller or equal than 10? Yes, it is. 2 is smaller than 10. So we come here, we do sum equals sum plus 1. So sum before was 1 from the previous iteration, and I now is 2. So it's going to be like 1 plus 2 equals 3. So now sum here is going to be 3. And now remember that I was 2. So I plus 1, 2 plus 1 is 3. So I is going to be 3. And now we go to test the expression. Is 3 bigger than 10? Yes, it is. So we go, over and over and over again until I is 10. So we come here like 10 is bigger or smaller than 10. Yes, it is, because it's 10 is equal 10. So that's still true. So we do the sum operation. We add whatever values they have on sum plus 10. And now we do 10 plus 1, 11. So I is going to be 11. And now we come to the condition. And the condition now is 11 is smaller or equal than 10. No, it's not. 11 is actually bigger than 10. So then the condition is false. So then we exit the while loop and we continue executing our code. So this line is a comment that says print the sum. Remember, comments are not executed. And then there is a statement which says the sum is, so print the sum is sum 55. So I hope, this is probably, while loops is probably the hardest thing we have done today. I hope you go through the examples again and think about the examples again, and you are more than welcome to ask me any question about this. But this is the last bit about Python programming that we are going to do today. So I hope it's clear for you before we continue.